Good evening, everybody. I, retired Deputy Director Animal Husbandry, Amritsar, Dr. P.K. Malhotra, retired recently from Animal Husbandry Department, Punjab. I'm quite privileged and feel pride to organize a seminar for my veterinary brothers fraternity. And the topic of my webinar is field diagnosis and interpretation of hemolytic anemias in bovines with special reference to tick-borne diseases. Before I proceed further, I welcome my all esteemed veterinary colleagues, friends, my retired veterinarians, researchers in this field, scientists, professors from various universities, my professionals who are linked with dairy industry in today's webinar. Brothers, why we have selected this topic? This is basically a field-oriented topic, and in our previous webinar on 8th, which was hematopathology and field diagnosis of commonly prevalent tick-borne diseases in bovines in India, where we discussed a lot again of the tick-borne diseases like anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and filariasis. And all the more important symptom of all the tick-borne diseases is anemia, and that too is hemolytic anemia. So it is a part or an extension of our previous seminar. So today we'll discuss at length about hemolytic anemia in this webinar caused due to tick-borne diseases. So as just a running, we all know about anemia. Anemia is an absolute decrease in red blood cells in blood, or decrease in hemoglobin concentration, or decrease in packed cell volume. And hemolytic anemia, as the name suggests, hemolytic. So this is also a form of anemia caused due to hemolysis of red blood cells. This is a abnormal breakdown of red blood cells either in the blood vessels, that is intravascular hemolysis, or elsewhere in the body, that is called extravascular hemolysis. So that can occur even in spleen or reticuloendothelial system of the body. So under all conditions, my brothers, my colleagues, my clinicians, they all encounter tick-borne disease leading to anemias, and that too hemolytic anemias. And prominently, they have all seen hemoglobinuria and anemia by seeing the eye conjunctiva of the animal, which is always white or pallor, or other mucous membrane of the body. Even anemia lead to difficulty in respiration or shortness of breath. We have seen positive jugular pulse in animals, in cows particularly, and we have seen tachycardia, and this all lead to jaundice. And many of my colleagues, in spite of treatment, they have seen the animals dying. So again, we will be updating your knowledge regarding hemolytic anemia caused due to tick-borne diseases. The above seminar is again sponsored by Caris Laboratories Private Limited, which is a well-known company having its head office at Karnal, Haryana. This is an export house of veterinary medicines. The company has its own US approved manufacturing field supplement unit in Karnal. The company is FEMI-QS certified, and it is a above 40 crore turnover unit. The company manufactures and sells many products and established many brands like Mycovet, Mycovet XL. Mycovet XL contains methylcobalamin, which is useful in the formation of blood cells, and this promote nerve conduction. So this is also quite helpful to combat anemia in animals. Like another product, which is a Dozliv syrup, bolus, injectable, and recently they have launched Dozliv Fort also. This is also a hepatostimulant and quite sportive in anemia therapy. So this contains L-carnitine, which is fatty acid transporter, and in addition, food contains betaine, choline chloride, magnesium sulfate, and sorbitol. So these are all sportive in the treatment of anemias in animals. And the other product I'm hurriedly speaking is Bovimin GL, which is a bolus as well as liquid is available, and this is a glycine chelated minerals having zinc, copper, cobalt, manganese, and this is also used as a hematinics in animals. So my sincerest thanks to the sponsors of the company, Caris Laboratories Private Limited, Karnal, and their team of Dr. Arun Polani, who is a veterinarian himself, quite known as a practitioner in his area, Dr. Jitendra Pilani, Mr. Lalit Kapoor, Dr. Rajan, and Dr. Chauhan. So our respected speaker for today's webinar is Dr. Naresh Kumar Sood. He is a pathologist, a known pathologist. He has retired as head of the Department of Veterinary Pathology, Guru Angad Dev Veterinary Animal Sciences University, Ludhiana, Punjab. He is a PhD. He is fellow Royal Veterinary College, Sweden. He is fellow Indian Association of Veterinary Pathologists. He is diplomat, Indian College of Veterinary Pathologists. So he is a renowned figure nationally as well as internationally as a pathologist. He is quite expert, rather perfect in clinical and diagnostic pathology. He is well versed with hematology, blood smears, blood parasites, diagnostic cytology, histopathology, immunopathology, immunobiochemistry, animal oncology, and so on. So, and above all, was involved in the establishment of centralized clinical diagnostic laboratory at Guru Angad Dev University, Ludhiana, and he remained he's in charge for 2.5 years. So he has played a big role in the establishment of that lab, which was established in year 2006. So he has a great contribution in the establishment of that lab and upkeep of that lab. He has got over 30 years of teaching experience in Gadwasu, Guru Angad Dev University, and he has guided many postgraduate and PhD students. During his career, he has won more than 70 national and international awards, honors, recognition in his field. He was the best ICR Teacher Award in 2017, and in his name, he has got 622 list of publication, which is quite a good stake. Sir, Dr. Naresh Sood, I am highly thankful for accepting our invitation as a speaker in this webinar today. So over to Dr. Naresh Sood.
Thank you, Dr. Malhotra, for such an elaborate introduction, which I really feel I'm not worth it. Good evening, all my friends. I'm thankful to Caris Laboratories again giving me a chance for the second time in a row, which is not an easy job to do. But when we were planning the second seminar, we were thinking what topic should be done. They were thinking a different topic. I thought we should give an extension to what we had talked earlier because when I was listening to the questions, I felt that we were going to talk about more about the blood smears and the prognostics or diagnostics at the field level. And that was my aim to cover that up by showing you the hemolytic anemia and its pathogenesis in tick-borne diseases as well as in general. So that issue I'm going to bring forth today. That is the aim. I am also thankful to the organizers, Dr. Arun Pilani, who is Managing Director of this Caris Laboratories, Mr. Jitendra Pilani, who is director of the firm, Mr. Lalit Kapoor, who is vice president of the company, Dr. Sumit Chauhan, and of course, Dr. Rajan Sharma, who has been instrumental always in talking to me and bringing this whole uh, episode together. I'm of course very much thankful to my friend Dr. Pavan Malhotra, who has been the real spirit behind carrying out this activity. He has inspired me, instigated me, and encouraged me that I should do this. And I'm extremely thankful to him. He has been in the field, but still he has so much interest in the science and in disseminating the knowledge of science. I'm extremely grateful to him. So without wasting any time, let us start our webinar. I am going to talk about the field diagnostics and interpretation of hemolytic anemia in bovines with special reference to tick-borne diseases. That is the issue I told you. And my emphasis today will be on basic things rather than too advanced things. So what I'm going to talk about, first I'm going to talk a little bit, one or two slides, anemia in general. That's not my topic. Then I'm going to talk about classification of anemia. Then I'm going to switch over to regenerative anemia, finally to hemolytic anemia. That's the topic. Because all hemolytic anemias are regenerative, anemia is the emphasis. Then the Haynes bodies and their role in hemolysis, which has been not much discussed. Then I'm going to talk about hemolytic anemia and tick-borne diseases. That is an extension of the previous lecture. Finally, I'm going to talk about tick-borne disease diagnostics and prognostics, particularly in relation to hematology and chemistry, which we did not discuss last time. So if we talk about anemia, the simplest definition of anemia would be decrease in the erythrocytic mass or erythron in the blood circulation. This is a very simple definition. If I say it is decrease of hemoglobin, PCV and TEC, or one of them or all three of them, that makes it difficult. But to assess it, we can do any of these, and the best would be to do PCV, followed by hemoglobin, followed by TEC. So best thing to determine anemia would be the hematocrit. And anemia can be due to two reasons, either due to decreased production of cells, which is at the bone marrow level. So if the machinery that is producing the RBCs is not working fine, we have anemia. If we have the end cells, they are destroyed, that is the RBC. RBC is an FT cell which is in the circulation. It is a unique cell without a nucleus in all mammals and still can survive up to 160 days in cattle. This is something wonderful about this cell. It is super saturated with hemoglobin, and after completing its lifespan, it is destroyed by breakdown or hemolysis, which is mostly extravascular. So very simple things I am going to talk about. Visual guide to anemia. How would you determine? You see, when you are collecting the blood, that's the simplest thing. Once you are collecting the blood, it is watery, it is light colored, the blood is not coagulating easily. If it is, there is no anticoagulant. Those are the common things that you see in an anemic blood versus a normal blood. And when you make a slide, still there is an indication. You see, when you make a slide, the slide will go longer. It will be a longer smear as compared to a normal smear. First thing. Second, it will be lighter than the normal. And when you stain it, you see here, This is a stained anemic smear, this is a normal smear. So this is a longer smear and this is lighter colored. So this light color would represent that this is anemia. So there's an indication everywhere. And when you spin the blood, still you will see that this is normal. So normally in a cow, let us say the hematocrit is about somewhere 32 to 35, 36%, and rest about 65% should be the plasma. But here this is reduced. So that is a clue given for anemia. And anemia will mostly land up into jaundice. And that's another clue. Plasma in several or many cases will show yellowish discoloration. That is indicative of jaundice. And when you do a smear and examine under the microscope, there are fewer cells, and whatever cells are there, those cells, they show less hemoglobin, which I'm going to talk about all those things. So when you go to the classification of anemia, there are a whole lot of classifications that have been proposed. So I'm going to talk about some of the basic classifications which have been followed internationally. The etiological classification, the morphological classification, the functional classification, the immune-based classification, or anemia, whether it is right from the birth, congenital or acquired. These are the basic classifications. And I'm talking about the functional classification and the immune-based, that is the emphasis. Morphology also, I'll be talking. Etiology also, I'll be talking. A little bit about the last also. But that is in context of the hemolytic anemia only. So if you go to the morphological classification of anemia, it is based upon the derived indices of the RBCs. Out of all the derived indices, there are many derived indices of RBCs which can be seen in advanced machines today. The most important is mean corpuscular volume and mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration. The best idea about how much hemoglobin is there in the RBC is given by MCHC rather than MCH. And the MCB would give you the best idea about the size of the RBC, whether the size is normal. See, size of RBC can be either normal, it can be enlarged, it can be smaller than normal. Hemoglobin, on the other hand, can be either normal or subnormal. It cannot be more than normal because I said RBC is always supersaturated with hemoglobin. And there is something added to that, that is RDW, red cell distribution width, which is very important. And when you try to interpret MCV, you should do it with the help of RDW. You should combine the two. Why? Because RDW will indicate you how many cells are large, how many cells are small, how much is the difference between the big and small cells. Because sometimes what happens, the small and big cells, they balance each other, and finally what you will find is a normocytic, which is wrong. So for that, RDW is important. So most anemias which are caused by destruction of the RBCs, the destruction can be either due to loss of blood, which can be external or internal, or due to lysis of the RBCs within the body. They are regenerative anemias. So that is a functional. Bone marrow here is very much functional. There can be other situations where the bone marrow is not functional, that is non-regenerative. So when we have reduced number of RBCs as in anemia, I showed you the pictures, the bone marrow is going to recoup, is going to react to that. and there is going to be erythropoiesis in the bone marrow. You can see that is a bone marrow smear which is showing much more RBCs lineage. Those red, those round nuclei, they are of RBCs, and these are the WBCs. So the myeloid cells are much reduced. Normally what happens in most of the bone marrow smears, the myeloid cells, they are more than erythroid cells. But here what happens, this ratio is rather reversed because there is anemia. So to this anemia, the bone marrow is reacting. Not only the bone marrow, if there is this bone marrow proving to be ineffective, then you find the other organs also start producing the erythrocytes and other cells. And this usually happens in the prenatal stage, in the fetal or embryonal stages. At the time of birth, this extramedullary hemopoiesis is not seen. But in severe anemias, you can see, I see many cases in cows and buffaloes where the spleen shows these megakaryocytes. Where from these big cells, megakaryocytes are there in the spleen on histology. They represent the extramedullary hemopoiesis, the simplest way to see the extramedullary hemopoiesis. How to differentiate between regenerative and non-regenerative anemia? The best thing to study is reticulocyte response in the species where they are usually seen. For example, in dogs, in humans, in rabbits, in cats, the reticulocyte response is extremely good. But in cows and buffaloes, this response is rather moderate. In non-regenerative anemia, there are no reticulocytes. The size of the RBCs in a regenerative anemia is large. Remember, immature cells are always larger than mature cells. This is true for all bone marrow cells, including RBC series. And in a non-regenerative anemia, they will be either normal or sometimes, rarely, they will be smaller. Nucleated RBCs in a regenerative anemia, they will come into the circulation because bone marrow is acting. Bone marrow is reacting, whereas in non-regenerative, they are absent. Polychromasia, variation in staining, because we have nucleated RBCs, we have larger RBCs, which don't have full content of hemoglobin, so they will be bluish, they will be different color than the normal RBCs, so that renders polychromasia. And in a non-regenerative anemia, this response will not be seen. This response generally will start in about 2 to 7 days in most species. In cows, this starts after 2 days. Hypochromasia, I already said, because the cells are bigger, they have less hemoglobin, they are released premature in their premature stage, so naturally they have not fully formed hemoglobin in them. And here the blood smear is the key. So when you study the blood smear, then you study all these things for regeneration. So blood smear remains by and large the best method for differentiating the regenerative and non-regenerative anemia. And the advantage also for the clinician is, if you say it is a regenerative anemia, probably clinician will be more happy than if you say it is a non-regenerative anemia. That is the first question in anemia by any clinician. See, the regenerative responses in cows and buffaloes are not that elaborate as in dogs or several other species I mentioned earlier. But still you can see the regenerative responses. I am going to show you the regenerative responses in the subsequent slides. So the response would start within about 2 days and take several weeks to accomplish. If there is a chronic hemorrhage or slow level or low level hemorrhage which is going on for a longer period, then you see the larger RBCs with a bigger MCV and lesser hemoglobin, that may be there, or hypochromic macrocytic RBCs may be seen. The reticulocytes in bovines are rather not that good a response, but you can still see reticulocytes in bovines. It's not as elaborate, it's not as defined as in dogs or cats or humans or other species. So I would say is rather inconsistent in many cases. So let us try to see some pictures. So this is a dog smear. Here you can see the reticulocyte response. These are polychromatophilia there is, and those are big cells which are big and they are bluish. They have a reticulate network. So that shows that there is a reticulocyte response. Presumably these are reticulocytes stained by special stains like new methylene blue or the brilliant cressyl blue. They can be stained and they will show you that reticulate pattern there. But in cow, look, it's not that easy, but still you can see some macrocytes, some bigger than normal cells, much bigger, and they are little blue too. So they represent reticulocytes. Nucleated RBC is another response that we see in cows and buffaloes quite often in severe anemias. So you can see these nucleated RBCs. I showed you those in the bone marrow, and here also you can see them. And you can see this is a very severe anemia. Can you see the RBCs are quite apart? There are a lot of gaps in the smear, and there are big RBCs as well, which presumably are immature RBCs. And this is anaplasma infected. You can see there are anaplasmas as well. Another thing which may reflect regeneration is the Howell-Jolly body, which is a nuclear remnant. So that represents the regenerative response either, or if the spleen is replaced or spleen is defective, that represents the response. But that could be the only response that I see in horses. In horses, how to detect regenerative anemia, it's very difficult. Only thing is macrocytosis or rarely Howell-Jolly bodies. Now we go over to hemolytic anemia in bovines and its causes. There can be whole lot of causes in the anemia, hemolytic anemia, which includes infectious agents. We are going to outline about these: Babesia, Theileria, Anaplasma. Last time I also discussed. Trypanosoma is also there. Staphylococcus is another one. Bacillary hemoglobinuria, Leptospira, not very common in this part of India, but I see Western India and Southern India, this response, this disease is there. Nutritional deficiencies like selenium, phosphorus, hypophosphatemia, immune-mediated hemolytic conditions, particularly response to vaccination sometimes, and very often this IMHA, immune-mediated hemolytic anemia, can be seen in many species. Toxic agents in herbivores can be several, like this onion and garlic. This can also be in dogs and humans, Brassica species, sweet potato and others, copper toxicity, zinc toxicity, arsenic, lead, nitrate, nitrite, diffuse intravascular coagulation, neoplasms, and hereditary spherocytosis all can cause hemolytic anemia in bovine. There is a documented literature for each of these. Out of that, what I'm going to talk about, these three, and then bacillary hemoglobinuria, then hypophosphatemia, these are where I'll stress. Chronic inflammation, in a way, also induces the shortened cell survival of the RBCs, thereby pre-senile destruction or hemolysis of the RBCs. Haynes bodies play a central role in hemolytic anemia. In fact, there is very little idea about this. Very few people understand that Haynes bodies are all the important in the causation of the hemolytic anemia. These Haynes bodies were described in 1890. They are indicative of oxidative injury to the erythrocyte, and this is in fact a denatured hemoglobin which appears as small dark round masses. In cats, however, normally the Haynes bodies are seen. Why? Because there are 8 thiol groups which are highly reactive, most reactive enzyme moieties. They are present on the globulin chains of the hemoglobin. That's why in the feline you find these in healthy cats. In others, they are all pathological. In addition to chemicals and toxins, the others can also produce hemolysis like antigen antibody reactions, complement, mechanical thermal injuries, all that. So before we go further, let us look at the basic structure of hemoglobin. It is important to show you this because the next discussion is based upon this. So we have two alpha chains, alpha 1, alpha 2. We have two beta chains, beta 1, beta 2. And we have the heme group, which is sitting in the center of these chains. And this is covered by the porphyrin ring. So iron here is in the form of ferrous. That is important. So in the hemoglobin, the iron is ferrous. And let us try to look at how the Haynes body formation is going to occur. So here you can see that in the hemoglobin, when it is oxidized, it becomes oxyhemoglobin. And if remains there for a longer period, what will happen? This may appear as floating Haynes bodies or small floating Haynes bodies. But if there is a prolonged oxidation or due to any factors why outlined, all the chemical poisons, all the plant poisons, some deficiencies, all can cause formation of Haynes bodies and methemoglobinemia. So here the ferrous is then oxidized into ferric, and which becomes on way to destruction. We call it as hemichrome. And you would see on the periphery this is electron micrograph, which is showing these floating bodies have now shifted to the membrane and they are seen as Haynes bodies. And these Haynes bodies, when they develop on an RBC, the RBC passes through the spleen, then they are broken off and you find these bite cells or blister cells, they develop because of this. And even eccentrocytes may develop because of this. So one of the key, how to identify the methemoglobin, which I showed you, when the ferrous of the hemoglobin is converted into ferric, this becomes a functional anemia because it can no more oxidize or attach with hemoglobin, and then that is seen as methemoglobinemia, and the clinical smear appearance is Haynes body. So this you see normally in nitrate nitrite poisoning. When you see nitrate nitrite poisoning, the blood is chocolate color. And you can do that by blotting on a tissue paper and see this is methemoglobinemia. This is the degree of methemoglobinemia that can also be determined if you have a control along with that if you have a standard on along with. So let us try to see these Haynes bodies now. This is a Haynes body that is developing. Look at that. And there are several Haynes bodies that are coming up. There is a Haynes body there. There are several more. They are on the surface. So these are the Haynes bodies which are seen. This is a cow. All the pictures that I'm going to show you will be cow or buffalo, most of them. Just for comparison, I'm keeping some dog. So here, then you see the formation of these blister cells, as I told you, and or eccentrocytes. And if you do the supravital stains like new methylene blue staining or brilliant cressyl blue, you will find these nicely. Otherwise, in a normal smear, as I showed you here, it's very difficult to appreciate these Haynes bodies in a Romanowski stained smear. So now these RBCs, because of the Haynes body formation, they become pervious to water and they swell and may show up as ghost cells and rupture. So that's how the hemolysis by Haynes bodies occurs. Also, they may be phagocytosed by the splenic macrophages. So you can see those swollen ghost RBCs in the electron microscope, and you can see those Haynes bodies there. And this is how they swell. This is the osmotic swelling. Water is entering the cell. Now let us go to tick-borne diseases and hemolytic anemia. That is an issue which I wanted to talk at length. So anemia, I told you, can also be classified as per the immune mechanisms. So immune mechanisms, if they are operating, it can be immune mediated or it can be non-immune mediated. Non-immune mediated could be mechanical injuries, it could be thermal injuries like burns, it could be mechanical injuries like DIC or some tumors. It can be chemicals. I have shown you some chemicals. It can be infections. It can be osmotic. But in all hemoprotozoan diseases, including babesiosis, theileriosis, and anaplasmosis, it is immune-mediated hemolytic anemia which is dominant. So how this immune-mediated hemolytic anemia occurs? See, when a parasite is going to infect an RBC, all these, filaria, babesia, anaplasma, they occur within the RBCs, thereby their antigens are expressed on the surface of the RBC. So there is a secretion of antibodies. The first response to the infection would be IgM in a naive animal which has not been exposed to any of these. And that is a short-lived response which is for about 15 days, starts very quickly and ends up very quickly. And the next response, the secondary response, is IgG response. So what happens when the RBC surface is altered because of the presence of parasitic antigen, either babesia, theileria, or anaplasma? It will invoke these responses. IgM, being a pentamer, will join several RBCs together and there will be agglutination of RBCs. Whereas if it is a complement IgG, it may not be a typical agglutination, and the complement may be activated halfway up to C3b, which is a opsonin. So if either the antibody IgG or the C3b attaches to the altered area antigen on the surface of the RBC, it will be taken to the spleen and spleen will identify it as non-self either through the Fc receptor of, this is the Fc receptor here. So either through the Fc receptors here or the complement and will phagocytose. We call it as extravascular hemolysis. Another mode could be when there are more such changes on the RBC membrane. What will happen? There will be more IgGs attached and that will activate the complement. And this will go up to the full cascade through C6 to C9 and that will cause the formation of perforins and membrane holes and the RBC will hemolyze. So this is how the things go. This is what we call as intravascular hemolysis. So there are 3-4 things here. The first thing is intravascular hemolysis, which occurs in Babesia. There can be agglutination of RBCs, which is also more commonly seen in Babesia than Theileria or Anaplasma. It can also cause activation of the complement in a complete way and hemolysis, or it can be incomplete activation of the complement or binding of few IgGs and taking it to extravascular hemolysis. So this is where we are going to focus our clinical pathology. So what is happening here? RBC either through extravascular hemolysis will be taken up by the macrophage, mainly in the spleen, to some extent in the liver and the bone marrow, and will form unconjugated bilirubin, which will combine with albumin. See, this unconjugated bilirubin combined with albumin is known as hemobilirubin, which is a large molecule, cannot be excreted by the kidney. And this is conjugated in the liver and thus we may have little more conjugated bilirubin excreted into the bile and excreted into the feces and also little bit more absorbed and going into the circulation, but the main hemoglobin that is circulating will be unconjugated bilirubin. Whereas on the other hand, if we look, when there is an intravascular hemolysis, there is a free, this is RBC, it is broken down, there is a free hemoglobin, and this free hemoglobin is a smaller molecule. There will be hemoglobinemia as a result, and there will be hemoglobinuria. And also this hemoglobin will join with the hepatoglobin and will be taken to the liver for conjugation. That's a part of the response, main response is this. But the things are like that, if there is a little bit of breakdown of RBCs, then this will not be hemoglobinuria, it will be taken to this pathway. But when there is excess of hemolysis, only then there will be hemoglobinuria. But when there is much more hemoglobinuria, then this pathway will dominate excretion through this pathway, and this will be only a limited pathway. Some part of it may also be taken to the reticuloendothelial system. So, if we go by this, spleen is more active in Theileria and Anaplasma because of the extravascular hemolysis mainly. So, what will happen? You will find the spleen is markedly enlarged in these diseases versus babesiosis, where the spleen is not that enlarged. Here, since this hemoglobin has to be taken up and brought to the liver with the help of hepatoglobin, so hepatoglobin gets conjugated with hemoglobin and thus the levels of hepatoglobulins, they fall in the serum in the intravascular hemolysis. Another thing is, in intravascular hemolysis, there will also be hemoglobinuria and hemoglobinemia. There will be hemoglobinemia first, then leading to hemoglobin urea. So let us try to see this extravascular hemolysis and fate of the hemoglobin in little more detail. See here, this is the erythrophagocytosis by the macrophages. Can you see so many RBCs within the macrophage? So that's erythrophagocytosis. And this is what is happening in the splenic or elsewhere macrophages. So what will happen, RBC, when it is broken down, it will release the protein globulins. I told you that alpha and beta globulins that will break up further into amino acids, will go as amino acid pools, and iron core will also be released, which binds with the transferrin and is transported for reuse. The porphyrin ring will also open up into protoporphyrin, which will form first biliverdin, then bilirubin. And this is unconjugated and going to the liver, getting conjugated through glucouronides, and which is excreted into the intestine through the bile duct. Some of it is reabsorbed and may be excreted as urobilinogen in the urine. Little bit about the iron storage, because we talked about somewhat about iron here. So body tries to conserve. This is important in treatment issue of regenerative anemia. So body tries to conserve the iron. What happens? The body storages of iron are just conserved. So normally in a human being there are about 1 gram of iron which is present in the body, and that is mainly stored in the liver and spleen. And iron daily absorption is about 1 to 2 milligram, and dietary iron is sufficient, and particularly in herbivores that is sufficient. And then it is also lost, the same amount of iron is also lost in the intestine from the blood. So what happens? That means we have a balance of the iron and we have enough iron. Remember that organic iron is 10 to 20 times more absorbed than the inorganic iron. And this iron, you see, then with the help of transport protein transferrin is being transported in the blood. So if there is any hemolysis, what will happen? The transferrin saturation will increase because we have free iron available which binds more with the transferrin, so that can be a test. Similarly, we have the iron going into the macrophages in different parts of the reticuloendothelial system, and there is a iron also present in the RBCs which is up to 1.8 grams. So let us try to see how to derive what kind of hemolytic anemia is there. See, when we look at the blood smear, we see for spherocytes. When we look at the picture, we see the hemoglobinemia, hemoglobin urea. We also look for parasites like Babesia, Thaleria anaplasma. We also try to look for indirect bilirubin or hemobilirubin. We also try to look for free iron as well as transferrin saturation. So if all these are present or many of them are present, several of them are present, it is a hemolytic anemia. Then we have to review its causes. If there is a hemoglobinemia and hemoglobin urea as well as ghost RBCs, we will think about intravascular hemolysis. If there is no hemoglobinemia, hemoglobin urea in a patient, no ghost RBCs, we will think about extravascular hemolysis. So if any of these are not present, then that can be due to more than what is understood here. and probably we may have to resort to more complicated or more advanced tests like Holmes test to determine the hemolytic anemia, particularly the autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So let us try to look for the laboratory evaluation of this hemolytic anemia. So if there is a extravascular hemolysis or intravascular hemolysis, there will be typical regenerative response in terms of polychromatophilia in both. There will be erythroid hyperplasia in the bone marrow and regenerative response in terms of nucleated RBCs. If you look at the plasma or serum, in the intravascular hemolysis as well as extravascular hemolysis, it's the unconjugated bilirubin or prehepatic, because this disease is prehepatic, not posthepatic or intrahepatic. So naturally we have hemobilirubin which can be detected, for which there is an indirect Vandenberg test. Hepatoglobulins will be almost used up in intravascular coagulation, intravascular hemolysis. Plasma hemoglobin will be much reduced in case of intravascular than extravascular hemolysis. Another very key point to differentiate would be lactate dehydrogenase, LDH, which is through release of the hemolytic RBCs. Again, in the intravascular hemolysis, you will have hemoglobin in the urine and hemosiderin in the urine. Hemoglobin is which kills the, the tubular epithelium, and you will find it in the urine. Let us look at some of the diagnostics and prognostics of this. I have already outlined these in the last lecture. So the first thing for determining any hemoprotozoan disease would be to look at the signalment and the history, whether it is a crossbred or a purebred cow. What is the age of the animal? See, younger groups would be affected with thalaria, babesia would be generally after 6 months, and anaplasma will be in older animals. This is the normal course of the disease that differentiates. History of transport or other stressors. So if we have movement of animals in and out of the farm, that what the generally, when I talk with Dr. Malhotra, I found this that most of the time the history is that this animal has been newly purchased, has been brought into the farm, and many people what they do, they try animals from here and there, purchase them and put them together in the same farm. That creates a lot of problems, tick-borne diseases. There is a history of ticks. You see the ticks at the farm, whether on the floor or otherwise. There is a seasonal occurrence of the disease. There are seasons like this. Now we have the rainy season, more ticks, hot and humid seasons. They bring in more ticks and more tick-borne diseases. At organized dairy farms, the tick-borne diseases are more. And when you have mixed farms, means you have the indigenous cattle, the buffaloes, and the exotic animals together, then you have more incidence of hemoprotozoan disease. Number of animals affected. Usually when there is a hemoprotozoan infection, then you have to screen the whole farm, the whole herd, because there may be some animals which are showing the disease at a moment and the others may be in incubation and yet others may be carriers. So you have to look at all the animals. Of course, they are causing high morbidity and mortality. That's why a lot of attention towards these diseases. Clinical signs, which I already outlined, these are general clinical signs. There is a high fever which can be up to 106. Anemia is a very common sign. That's why we took this topic up. Jaundice is another pretty common sign, not always, but you can see weight loss and lethargy. The animal is lagging behind in the herd and sitting, because when once the animal is anemic, what will happen? It will become lazy. It will not try to move too much. The lymph node enlargement, particularly in Thalaria, hemoglobinuria, particularly in Babesia. So these are the major clinical signs that you see. Apart from that, there can be corneal opacity, for example, in Thalaria. There can be lacrimation or nasal discharge in Thalaria, congestion, at times small hemorrhages in the conjunctiva or udder, that, or even vagina, that can be in Thalaria. Constipation in cases of anaplasma, diarrhea in cases of Thalaria. Dr. Malhotra already outlined tachypnea and dyspnea. They are representing anemia. Because of the anemia, the heart is beating fast, tachycardia is also there, and the respiration is also going high. And when the anemia is severe, it's abdominal respiration or dyspnea. And there can be rarely abortions in the late pregnancy, in particularly anaplasma and babesia. Now the question is why there is a intravascular hemolysis in babesiosis and it is not in thalarosis or anaplasmosis. The answer is not clear cut. But remember, the babesia multiplies, all the asexual cycle takes place in the bovine host. So naturally what happens? The antigens are expressed on the surface. This is a atomic force microscopy, and thus there are a lot of antigens or epitopes of antigens which are expressed, and how close they are, how many they are, that determines whether the hemolysis will be intravascular. If they are very close, too many, the IgGs will link together. IgM, of course, can do it. IgGs will also link and activate the complement through full pathway, means through not only C3b but C6 to C9, and will cause hemolysis. And this is more prominent in bovis than bigemina. And these are some pictures which I'm showing that this is a hemoglobinemia. The plasma is red, that is an indication that it is a babesia. And this is a hemoglobinuria. Once you see the hematuria and hemoglobinuria, you centrifuge it, and on centrifugation it will not clear up. And here, as the babesia recovers, you see the urine will also recover. It will become normal colored at some point of time. There are some diseases which have to be differentiated from babesia. Bacillary hemoglobinuria is one. Although it's not that common, I have not seen that many cases, rare cases. But more often we see post-parturient hemoglobinuria, which is around the parturition up to 30 days of calving. And this is seen particularly in heavy eaters because there is so much of phosphorus and calcium used up in producing the milk. So there is a deficiency of phosphorus leading to the weak membrane of the RBCs, because there are a lot of phospholipids, leading to rupturing of the RBCs and hemoglobin urea. And this is seen particularly in the later part of the pregnancies. During third to sixth lactation, most of the cases are there.
So I think there's some technical issue with Dr. Sood's laptop. So we'll start with our product presentation. So firstly, I would like to introduce myself. Myself, Dr. Sumit. I am working as a product manager, Caris Laboratories Private Limited. So today I would like to discuss two of the two very unique products of our CAT portfolio. That is Mycovet and Dozliv. We'll have a session of our products for just a small session. Then the Dr. Sood will continue his session. So Caris Innovations. So Caris has launched methyl cobalamin in Mycovet and L-carnitine in as a Dozliv in first time in Indian veterinary industry. Mycovet, it contains nicotinamide 50 mg, pyridoxine hydrochloride 50 mg, methyl cobalamin 500 mcg per ml, and the improved version of Mycovet is Mycovet X, which is a more concentrated form of vitamin B12. It contains 2500 mcg per ml of methyl cobalamin. Mycovet contains nicotinamide, pyridoxine hydrochloride, and methyl cobalamin. So first one is niacin. So basically niacin has a vital role in the release of energy, which is required for the erythropoiesis. Basically, niacin is it acts as a coenzyme for the NAD and NADPH synthesis, which has a key role in the electron transport chain. So these NAD and NADPH helps in the act as a cofactor for the electron transport chain and helps in the release of the energy, which is required for the erythropoiesis, the red blood cell formation. Niacin is also important for the proper blood circulation. It is essential for the metabolism of proteins and carbohydrates, and it is also required for the healthy functioning of the nervous system. Then vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 helps for the formation of various neurotransmitters in the body, and it also helps in the formation of hemoglobin. Thus, it regulates the process of erythropoiesis. Then vitamin B12, methyl cobalamin is required for the synthesis of THF and methionine. THF is tetrahydrofolate. This tetrahydrofolate is basically as a building block for the purine and pyrimidine basis of the DNA. So it helps in the DNA synthesis and the formation of new red blood cells. On the other hand, methionine is a well-known methyl group donor. It helps in the formation of myelin sheath around the neurons. So whenever there is any injury or torn of the myelin sheath, so it helps in the regeneration of neurons and helps in the faster conduction of the nerve impulses. So indications: anemia, weakness, ataxia, anorexia, weight loss, indigestion, any nervine problems, lameness. Presentation: Mycovet is available in 10 ml, 30 ml, and 100 ml injection. Mycovet XL is available in 2 ml, 10 ml, 30 ml, and 50 ml injection. So next product is Dozliv Forte. It is a 5-day hepatostimulant. It contains L-carnitine, betaine, choline chloride, magnesium sulfate, and sorbitol. This is a very interesting product. It has a different mode of action than the herbal formulations available in the market, and I'm sure that you would enjoy this product presentation. The effect of hematoproteasome diseases on the liver. So all of us are aware and know that the liver is a main organ with all these. All of us are aware that the liver is a main organ that is affected and stressed in hematological disorders caused by the hemoprotozoan diseases. Basically, the excess hemolysis put a load on the liver and leads to hepatic injury. So hepatic injury or liver cell damage will induce hepatic lipidosis, hyperbilirubinemia, and oxidative stress in the liver. So Dozlifort is basically a 5-way hepatostimulant. So in the first way, L-carnitine. So what is the basic role of the L-carnitine? So L-carnitine is basically well-known fatty acid transporter and oxidation. Is well known for fatty acid transport and oxidation. What it does, it transport the excess fat in the liver to the mitochondrial membrane. Inside the mitochondrial membrane, this fat undergoes the beta oxidative pathway and to produce energy. In this way, it prevents the cases of hepatic lipidosis or fatty liver. This is a graph that shows that when we supplement the L-carnitine, there is a decrease in level of NIFA, that is non-esterified fatty acids, and triglycerides. And basically in cases of stress also, the L-carnitine requirement increases. If the L-carnitine is there, it will burn the excess fat in the liver and prevent the cases of fatty liver. So in the graph, we have also shown that where the L-carnitine is given, it decreases the level of NIFA, non-esterified fatty acids, and triglycerides, which may accumulate in the liver. So detoxification. So L-carnitine has a alagogue effect, which stimulates the flow of bile into the GIT. As we all know that the bile has a flushing effect on the body. It flush the waste products and the toxins out from the liver. So in the graph, we have shown that it corrects the hyperbilirubinemia. Like excess bilirubin, it is toxic to the body also and for the liver also. So it helps in the flushing of the excess bilirubin out of the body so that it may not cause the hepatic injury or hepatic inflammation. Third role of L-carnitine is it relieves the oxidative stress and inflammation. How it relieves oxidative stress? Basically, it reduces the level of reactive oxygen species and increases the antioxidant, increases the capacity and the number of antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, glutathione dismutase. So what happens when the concentration of this antioxidant enzymes increases, it will neutralize more and more free radicals. So in this way, it decreases the oxidative stress and inflammation. L-carnitine also relieves the inflammation by reducing the level of tumor necrosis factor alpha and IL-6, which are the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which also lead to liver inflammation. So then how we measure the liver inflammation? Like there should be some marker by which we can check that the liver is inflamed or not inflamed. So ALT and AST, these are the two markers of the liver inflammation. So in this graph, we have shown that when we give the L-carnitine, it reduces the level of ALT and AST to the normal range. So and decreases the liver inflammation. Second way is betaine. So betaine has a promising antioxidant effect. It reduces the level of reactive oxygen species and increases the total antioxidant capacity of the body. It's shown in the graph. So betaine increases the total antioxidant capacity of the body. Third is choline chloride. So choline and its metabolites are needed for three main physiological purposes. It maintains the structural integrity and signaling role for the cell membranes. It acts in the acetylcholine synthesis for the nerve transmission, and it acts as a major source of methyl groups and participate in the fat metabolism. So it also helps in the burning of excess fat in the liver and produce energy. Fourth phase, magnesium sulfate. Magnesium sulfate acts as a cofactor for various enzymes that are involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And it also acts as a cofactor for the glutathione synthesis. Basically, glutathione is an antioxidant hormone, basically antioxidant enzyme. Sorry. So glutathione helps in the bind to toxins and flush the toxins out of the body, and it also strengthens the immune system by protecting the cell from free radicals. Glutathiones have two type of roles in detoxification of liver and in reducing the inflammation of liver, which is caused by the free radicals. Fifth way is sorbitol. As you know, sorbitol is a well-known osmotic laxative. It facilitates the quick elimination of toxins from the GI tract. Because if these toxins are not excreted early, they will cause problems. So there should be something in the formulation that enhance this excretion, that so that these toxins get excreted very rapidly. So in the diagram is shown that because these sorbitol and lactulose, these are the laxative commonly used. So these colonic bacteria use these sorbitol and they produce some organic acids. Because of these organic acids, there is increase in intra-osmotic osmotic pressure of the intestine, which leads to increased peristalsis and helps in the excretion of more and more toxins out of the body. So dosely-4, it contains L-carnitine, betaine, choline chloride, magnesium sulfate, and sorbitol. It is a 5-way hepatostimulant. Indications: loss of appetite, hepatic injury or hepatitis, fatty liver, ketosis, drug-induced hepatotoxicity, convulsions, to boost the immune system, environmental stress and change in feed, nutritional stress, and managemental stress also. So presentation, it is available in 500 ml, dosely-4, and we have a range of dosely family. So dosely-4 500 ml, plain dosely with L-carnitine and choline chloride. It is available in both liquid and bolus form. So dosely and dosely injection, it is available in 10 ml and 100 ml. So thank you for giving your valuable time to us. And now Dr. Sood will continue his session. So Dr. Sood, kindly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, it's working fine now. So we were talking about hemoglobinemia and hemoglobinuria, which are the hallmarks of babesiosis. And here you see the hemoglobinuria after treatment is getting cleared up, and for that we have a drug of choice, the Barinil. We talked about these bacillary hemoglobinuria and post-parturient hemoglobinuria as differentials. Now we come to the hemoprotozoan diseases, and this is a slide of theileriosis. I want to emphasize here one thing, that if you see the clear-cut parasites, that means it's an active infection. If you see the parasites are not clear, they are not good stained, they are smaller, they are fragmented, probably it has been half treated. There is also a staining variation. For example, here this is stained with Giemsa. In Giemsa stained smears, the parasites are more visible, whereas in Romanowsky stain, this is Leishman stain, and you can see they are not as clear as they are here. So again, you can see this is on Giemsa. You can see the Babesia more clear as compared with the Romanowsky stain or the Leishman stain. Similarly, sometimes what happens, these cells on a Romanowsky stain or Giemsa stain, they are not on any Romanowsky stain. They are not well stained. They are understained. So what happens? These leukocytes, these are basically neutrophils. So they will be identified as reticulocytes. They are not reticulocytes. This is a cow smear. It's a severely anemic smear. Degree of parasitemia is very important prognosticator. Supposing there are few parasites, for example, here there is one, there are few Thalaria, here there are too many Thalaria. So which one is having more worse prognosis? Naturally, this one is having a worse prognosis as compared to this. So there has been a study carried out in which the anemia has been directly related to the parasitemia in Thalaria. For example, here the hemoglobin is 6.85 and the degree of parasitemia is 3.86. Whereas in the severe anemia, where the hemoglobin has gone down to 3, the parasitemia is 34%. So that is a very important prognosticator in hemoprotozoan diseases, the degree of parasitemia. Another prognosticator would be the liver injury, which can be determined with quite good confidence by looking at the acanthocytes and schistocytes. These are seen on a blood smear. So if you see acanthocytes and schistocytes on a blood smear, I tell you in bovines, this is a very good indicator of liver failure, better than dogs. Leukocytic responses. For example, you have anemia here, you have less anemia here, but look, here the neutrophils are mature, here all the neutrophils are immature. So there is a severe left shift. There are very few platelets, there is just one platelet there. So this case is having a worse prognosis, although anemia in this case is severe. In this, the anemia is not there, is not that severe. But still, this case certainly has a worse prognosis than this. So this is another prognostic indicator. If you see reactive lymphocytes or lymphoblasts on a smear, that indicates a chronicity or recovery from infection. So it would indicate that the animal is either recovering, you see there are just few remnants of the parasite, or it is a chronic disease like that in anaplasmosis where there are many chronic cases. Similarly, the platelet responses. There is a thrombocytopenia. Anemia in both is very severe. Hemoglobin is hardly 2.5 or 2 here, but still here there are platelets. Here there are no platelets. There are very few platelets. So what happens? This case is having a worse prognosis than this. Although both are severely anemic, hemoglobin is similar. When we have more than one infection, for example, anaplasma and Thalaria together, that also adds up to bad prognosis. So if we have both together, that will indicate that the prognosis is difficult and treatment becomes complicated. That's why people are trying to do PCR technologies to find out the mixed infection cases, to sort out the mixed infection cases. In hemoprotozoan diseases, particularly babesiosis, there is immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. I told you there can be agglutination if it is IgM, or if there are lot many antigenic determinant sites on the RBC, they are close by or overcrowded. There will be clubbing of the RBCs forming agglutination. This is mild, this is dog. This kind of agglutination in cows is not so clear, but still you can see agglutination in cows, which can say that it is a immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. Another thing, when you have a immune-mediated hemolytic anemia or agglutination of the RBCs, and you have a leukemoid response in a cow or a buffalo, that indicates that there is so much inflammation ongoing, that means the prognosis is not too good. This is case of lymphoid leukemia. So in a lymphoid leukemia, there is also the agglutination. So in cancers also you can see agglutination. So you can do saline agglutination test for determining the agglutination, in which you take one small drop of blood, mix it one small drop of saline and look under the microscope, and there is agglutination. So this indicates a immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. In cows, this agglutination is not as prominent as in buffaloes. In buffaloes, we see better immune-mediated hemolytic anemia-induced hemagglutination. And here, spherocytosis is another way of looking at the immune-mediated hemolytic anemia in cases of hemoprotozoa. This is from a dog, and you can see very clear-cut spherocytes, but on the bovine side also you can see the spherocytes. They are pseudo-hyperchromatic. They have much more color. See, here also, they have a dark color. This is not true hyperchromasia. I told you it is already supersaturated with hemoglobin. How the spherocytes are actually formed? This can be either hereditary defect or acquired defect, as in hemoprotozoal diseases there can be spherocytosis. So what will happen? There will be formation of these blebs, and once they go into the spleen, this will be removed and it will become a spherical. The RBC is a biconcave structure. So once a part of the membrane is punched off in the reticuloendothelial system, it becomes a spherocyte. That is because of the expression of antigen or membrane defects that are developing, and they are punched off by the spleen, and the remaining RBC becomes a sphere, what we call as a spherocyte. So this is a very good indication of immune-mediated hemolytic anemia, better indication than the agglutination, because it's only about 10% cases where you find agglutination of RBCs. The rest of the 85 to 90% cases where you will find spherocytosis. For determining the fragility of the RBCs, we do a test. We call it as osmotic fragility test. So normally what will happen? In a normal situation, what will happen? The RBCs will hemolyze only at lower concentration. See, this is a normal saline. If we start somewhere there, it should be 0.85, then 0.7, 0.65. We are reducing up to 0.30, these NaCl concentration. So hemolysis is occurring in a normal blood at 0.45 to 0.30 concentration. Whereas if there is a spherocytosis, this would start occurring much earlier. So that means the RBCs in this spherocytosis blood, they are more fragile than the normal. So this can be a very good test in the field condition. It's a very simple test. You have to make the saline concentrations and put the limited amount of blood there and see for hemolysis. This you can read also. The photometry you can do on this. There is a evolving test on the bovine side, the direct Coombs test. Although this test has been performed in humans, they have more tests like indirect Coombs test. In dogs also they have direct and indirect. In horses also they have for cats also. And some people have tried this direct Coombs test in the bovine also. So what happens in this test? We have these antibodies which are anti-antibodies. which are already bound to the patient RBC. I told you IgG. So these are anti-IgGs. So they link the RBCs and agglutination is seen under the microscope, and that's what is direct Coombs test. So if we look at the overall prognosticators, look from the hematology. How much hemoglobin is there? That is very important. For example, a cow with a hemoglobin 7 versus a cow with hemoglobin 2 would be more severe prognosticator, would indicate that prognosis is poor and you have to resort to something very, very urgent. Platelets, if there are decreased or no platelets, that indicates DIC, which means the animal is not likely to survive. Increased reticulocytes or nucleated RBCs indicate a better prognosis than no regenerative response. If you look at the peripheral blood, you look for RBC, WBC, and platelet morphology. So I already showed you if you have acanthocytes, schistocytes, that means there is a liver damage. If there is a polychromasia, anisocytosis, that means there is a regenerative anemia. Similarly, if there are nucleated RBCs, it will also indicate a regenerative anemia. Similarly, on the biochemical side, we have the prognosticators. So I told you this LDH. If the LDH levels are high, this is a very simple test, can be done in any lab. The intravascular hemolysis is very probable. Very simple thing. Similarly, you can determine the unconjugated bilirubin. So total bilirubin, unconjugated bilirubin. If the unconjugated bilirubin is too high, then you will say that this is likely to be extravascular hemolysis. But it can also increase in intravascular hemolysis. But if it is too high, probably it is extravascular hemolysis. If hepatoglobin is extremely decreased or absent, that means it is intravascular hemolysis rather than extravascular hemolysis. These are very clear-cut signals of intravascular hemolysis. Similarly, hemosideruria is seen more in intravascular hemolysis. Urinary urobilinogen, that will increase more in extravascular hemolysis than intravascular hemolysis. Serum iron and transferrin saturation will also be more in extravascular hemolysis. So this is sum up of the different prognosticators. And finally, I come back to this slide, which has already been discussed. All these products, they are available with the company for the treatment of hemoprotozoan diseases and for recouping the anemia as well as the liver damage. This has been already detailed by Sumit ji. Thank you very much, all of you, and I am thankful to the Pilani brothers, Lalit ji, Sumit and Rajan ji, and of course Dr. Pavan Malhotra, who has been the anchor of this show.
Thank you, Dr.
And and I'm sorry for the interruption, because these are common things which happen in our scenario.
So thank you, Dr. Sood, for such an elegant presentation. Now we will have some question and answer session. So there are some queries. So first, sir, are you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm stopping my screen share here.
Okay. So first question is from Mr. Pavan Kumar. So he has a query. So he's saying that, sir, what is the difference between PCV and hematocrit? Are they same or not?
They are the same. PCV and hematocrit is just a nomenclature synonym, nothing.
Okay. Another question from Mr. Pavan Kumar. Sir, is it correct to always arrive at HB hemoglobin is equal to PCB by 3 or RBC is equal to PCB by 5.
It's by 6, not 5. Uh, the thing is, you know, for different species, there could be little different parameters. It depends upon the how much RDW is there. Okay, where there is a consistency in size of RBCs and everything is normal. For example, humans and dogs, this RDW is 11 to 14. In cows, it is somewhere between 16 to 21. So RDW is more in case of cows, and naturally, you see, this may not be exactly true, but to a larger extent, this formula can be standardized for different species and then applied. Probably we have to do a corrected formula for every species, not universally applicable for whatever is for humans or dogs, not here exactly. And it's like a corrected reticulocyte count or the uncorrected count. Anyhow.
The question is that some calf is found that they are highly anemic within 10 to 20 days of birth, having a large lymph nodes and yellowish stool. Temperature ranges 105 to 106. What would be the diagnosis? Is the disease vertically transmitted from mother?
Yeah, anaplasmosis, there is a transplacental transmission is reported in anaplasmosis. But in Babesia, it is it is some doubtful. There are some say that it is, some say it is not. Okay, so very likely anaplasmosis if it is a hemoprotozoan, but there everything is not defined here. It's just a few of the parameters have been said and others are missing. So based upon that, there can be no diagnosis exactly. But if you suspect the hemoprotozoa, then among them the possibilities anaplasmosis number one, number two Babesia, Thaleria no. Thaleria, but still Thaleria can also be there because Thaleria occurs in the younger group, but there is no transplanted placental transmission. I want to ask the questioner who is questioning the person, what do you want to know exactly? Because the question is a little ambiguous.
Actually, the name is not. Name is there. The name is Dr. Sanchit from West Bengal.
You ask him what he wants to ask exactly. Anyhow, next.
Next question is there. Sir, how some large animals stay alive with hemoglobin 3 to 4% only, 3 to 4 grams only?
Uh, See, when the anemia is developing abruptly, it is very difficult to survive. But when the anemia is developing slowly, the body adjusts, adapts to that mechanism. For example, the hemoglobin within a month, let us say, goes from 10 in a cow, which is normally 10, about 10, goes to about say 9 or 8 within a month or two, and then after 6 months it goes to 6. The system adapts to it. The animal may still be live, but it is unproductive, it's lazy, it is having a lot of morbidity.
Another question is from Mr. Simran. How we can differentiate between protozoan anemia and nutritional anemia?
I think I explained whole story there. You have to differentiate it on the basis of blood smear or other tests, advanced tests that are available. You can do anything. And this another thing, if you see clinically in that from that angle, probably nutritional deficiencies will not have high fever. Okay, the history of ticks, all those things. But the basic differentiation point would be again confirmatory would be a proper test based on which you will do blood smear or ELISA or PCR or whatever.
The next question is from Mr. Atul Narang. Sir, in nitrate toxicity, how much delay in providing methylene blue is acceptable?
This is not my question, it is not a pathologist's question. Okay, of course methylene blue has to be given there, I know that. This probably you can address to a clinician.
We can answer in shortly.
Hello. Interestingly, I know one thing that nitrite poisoning, they produce Haynes bodies, and methylene blue toxicity also produces Haynes bodies. This is interesting part of the story.
Sir,
If you give excess of methylene blue, that can also be bad.
another question is there. What does the thrombocytosis indicates?
Thrombocytosis is a reactive response. It is a basically indicative that there is ongoing hemorrhage. If the hemorrhage, low level hemorrhage is continuing for some days, then the bone marrow reacts like the RBCs in Matura. So naturally there is a hyperplasia of the thrombocytic lineage in the bone marrow and the platelets are coming into the stream, into the blood.
Another question is there. Can you elaborate what are the activated platelets, which are the most of the time we came across in blood smear of Buffalo, which are confused to Panozoma?
Yeah. Reactive platelets represent a response to inflammation. Okay, when there is inflammation, you will find reactive platelets. So they also involve that indicate that the bone marrow is reactive and in a hurry it is producing the platelets. When it is producing the platelets in a hurried manner, the immature platelets are certainly bigger than the mature.
So Dr. Sanchit is saying from West Bengal that he wants to say that those calves are treated with carbaquinol get good results. But so it may be filaria. So the question is that how it transmitted from mother to environment.
For this, I think we have to look at the incubation period. I told you there is no transplacental transmission. So naturally, we have to look for thalaria, the particular incubation period, how much incubation has been there, whether there are history, and we have to demonstrate the organism in the blood smear and then say it is thalaria. Okay, not a hypothetical basis.
Sir, another question is there.
In response to therapy, I would say is one of the ways, but not the precise way to diagnose a disease.
Another question is there. Sir, if we collect 1 ml of blood in 2 ml capacity blood collection tube with EDTA, is there any error regarding the hemogram values?
Yes, certainly there can be, because once you have excess CDTA in the vial, you have less blood naturally. That is going to cause problems with the RBCs and WBCs, and staining may not be that precise.
So another question is there from Dr. Mohit Sharma. What are acanthocytes and cystocytes?
Oh, for that I wanted to show you the slide anyhow. Uh, Acanthocytes and schistocytes. Acanthocytes are the cells which have irregular projections on their surface. They have less than 10 projections, which are like thorns on the surface, and it is believed that this is due to liver damage. What happens? Because of the liver damage, the cholesterol is not used up. There is a hypercholesteremia, and that cholesterol is stored into the RBC membrane. The RBC membrane that becomes from this to more rigid. It becomes like a wire, and when it passes through the microvasculature, this goes like this, a thorny projection on the surface, which is irreversible. That is why these projections are much lesser. They are less than 10. This is what is reported. In a crenated RBC, they are more than 10. They are longer. They are irregular. I would say in crenated RBC, you will find more regular projections. They are shorter ones, whereas, and more than 10. Acanthocyte, they are fewer, they are irregular. That is the key. And schistocytes, when the acanthocytes projections are there, they are liable to break off. Once you have those irregular projections, again they pass through the microvasculature or splenic vessels, what will happen? They will rupture. And that is what is a fragment of a RBC schistocyte. Yes.
Sir, another question is there: how to differentiate anaplasmosis and filariasis on the basis of clinical signs in cattle?
Anaplasmosis and thaliariosis. Yeah, the simple thing would be to look for the lymph nodes first. Okay. So if the lymph nodes are swollen, particularly the pre-scapular and pre-femoral, okay, those two lymph nodes, particularly they are swollen. If they are swollen, then you can have an aspirate from there and try to differentiate. That will be the best thing, okay. And age of the animal, okay, that's also there, because anaplasmosis would occur more often in older animals than filariasis. And corneal opacity could be another differentiate. There can be lacrimation, I told you, and nasal discharge, which are more often seen. I won't say they cannot be seen in anaplasmosis. There can be secondary infections, but they are more often seen in thalaria than. So all those things probably, but the precise diagnosis is only smear from the lymph node or blood smear. Lymph node is better than blood smear if they are swollen.
Thank you, sir. And we have attended all the questions. And lastly, I would like to thank you, Dr. Naresh Sood, for sharing their valuable experiences with us, and Dr. P.K. Malhotra for such an beautiful coordination, and for all the attending veterinarians, participants, our guests, for sparing their valuable time for us, and also the CARES faculty for arranging these type of educational webinars. So thank you and good evening for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm thankful to the CARES management and Dr. Malhotra again for doing this wonderful job. Thank you very much.